Imagine a man so terrifying that he's believed to have killed over 300 young girls, yet somehow he's walked free. This is the chilling story of Pedro Alonso Lopez, a man whose name sends shivers down the spine of anyone who hears it. Stay with us as we dive deep into the life of one of the world's most horrifying serial killers, known as the Monster of the Andes. Pedro Alonso Lopez wasn't just any criminal. He was a nightmare come to life. Born on October 8, 1948 in Colombia, Pedro's early life was nothing short of tragic. His father died before he was even born, and his mother, a poor sex worker, struggled to provide for her large family. Growing up in such harsh conditions, Pedro's childhood was filled with abuse, neglect, and the harsh realities of street life. But no one could have predicted that this boy would grow up to become one of the most prolific serial killers in history. Pedro's childhood was a horror story in itself. At the age of 8, his mother caught him trying to touch his sister inappropriately, and instead of addressing the issue, she threw him out of the house. Alone on the streets, Pedro was vulnerable, and soon he was picked up by a man who promised him food and shelter. But instead of help, this man sexually assaulted him, leaving deep psychological scars. Pedro ran away and tried to survive as a street child. By the age of 12, he was taken in by an American couple who enrolled him in a school for orphans. It seemed like his life might take a turn for the better, but unfortunately, he ran away after being molested by a teacher. The streets became his home again, and Pedro's mind grew darker. By the time he was in his 20s, Pedro's inner demons had fully taken over. He began his horrific killing spree in Peru in the 1970s, targeting young girls who he believed were easy prey. His method was chillingly systematic. He would lure girls between the ages of 8 and 12 away from their homes, often pretending to be a kind stranger. Then, he would lead them to a secluded spot, rape them, and finally, strangle them to death. After killing several girls in Peru, Pedro was caught by an indigenous tribe. They were prepared to execute him, but a missionary intervened, convincing the tribe to hand him over to the police instead. Shockingly, the police didn't hold him for long. They simply deported him back to Colombia, where he continued his reign of terror. In Colombia, and later Ecuador, Pedro claimed even more victims. He was so good at covering his tracks that the authorities didn't realize they were dealing with a serial killer until it was too late. By the time he was finally arrested in 1980 in Ecuador, he had already murdered hundreds of girls across multiple countries. Pedro Alonso Lopez was arrested after attempting to abduct a young girl from a market. The girl's mother fought back, and the police were called. When they brought Pedro in for questioning, they had no idea who they were dealing with. It wasn't until Pedro started talking that the true horror came to light. Pedro confessed to killing over 300 girls across Colombia, Peru, and Ecuador. He even led the police to the graves of 53 of his victims in Ecuador alone. His confessions were chillingly detailed, and he showed no remorse. He talked about how he would leave the bodies in open graves so he could watch them decompose. Despite his shocking confessions, Pedro Alonso Lopez's story takes an even more unbelievable turn. In 1983, he was convicted of 110 murders in Ecuador and sentenced to just 16 years in prison, the maximum sentence in Ecuador at that time. Yes, you heard that right. 16 years for over 100 murders. In 1994, Pedro Alonso Lopez was released for good behavior after serving just 14 years. But instead of being a free man, he was deported to Colombia, where he was immediately arrested again. However, due to a legal technicality, he was declared insane and placed in a psychiatric hospital. But even this didn't last long. Just 3 years later, in 1998, Pedro was released on a $50 bail. Since then, he has disappeared, and his whereabouts are unknown. Some say he may have died, while others fear he's still out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting to strike again. Pedro Alonso Lopez, the Monster of the Andes, may be the most terrifying criminal you've never heard of. His story is a stark reminder of the darkness that can exist in the human soul. Over 300 innocent lives were lost to this monster, and the fact that he might still be out there sends chills down the spine. So what do you think? Do monsters really exist? Or is the true horror the system that allowed a man like Pedro to walk free? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you have enjoyed the video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more of this kind of content. Stay safe out there. Jim Jones, a name that will forever be etched into the darkest corners of history, was the leader of the People's Temple, a religious cult that ended in one of the most horrifying tragedies of the 20th century. His story is a chilling reminder of the dangers of absolute power, manipulation, and the vulnerability of those who seek hope in the wrong places. Born on May 13, 1931, in Crete, Indiana, Jim Jones grew up in a turbulent environment. His father, an alcoholic, and his mother, a woman who believed her son was destined for greatness, both played significant roles in shaping his complex personality. From a young age, Jones was fascinated by religion and power, often preaching to children in his neighborhood. He was a peculiar child, known for his obsession with death and intense charisma, which would later draw thousands of followers to his side. In the early 1950s, Jones began his career as a pastor. He was a passionate advocate for racial integration, an issue that was highly controversial at the time. This progressive stance initially attracted a diverse following, and in 1955, he established the People's Temple in Indianapolis, Indiana. The church was founded on principles of social justice, equality, and communal living, values that resonated deeply with many people, especially those marginalized by society. As the People's Temple grew, so did Jones's influence. He preached a message of equality, promising his followers a utopia free from racism, poverty, and inequality. However, beneath this veneer of benevolence, there lurked a more sinister agenda. Jones was a master manipulator, using his charisma and the guise of religion to control his followers. He demanded absolute loyalty and used psychological manipulation, fear, and even physical abuse to maintain his authority. By the mid-1960s, Jones had relocated the People's Temple to California, first in Ukiah and later in San Francisco. His influence in the political and social circles of San Francisco grew, and he became a respected figure in the community. However, as his power increased, so did the scrutiny. Rumors of abuse, financial mismanagement, and other criminal activities began to surface. To escape this growing pressure, Jones sought to create a utopian society, far from the reach of American authorities. In 1974, Jones leased a large tract of land in the remote jungles of Guyana, South America. There, he established Jonestown, a self-sustaining agricultural community that he claimed would be a paradise on earth. Over 1,000 of his most loyal followers, many of whom had given up everything they owned, relocated to Jonestown in the hope of building a better future. But the reality of Jonestown was far from the utopia they had been promised. Life in Jonestown was harsh, the settlement was isolated, the living conditions were poor, and the work was grueling. Jones's control over his followers intensified, and he became increasingly paranoid. He surrounded himself with armed guards, controlled communication with the outside world, and enforced a strict regimen of work and propaganda. He also began to preach about the inevitability of an impending apocalypse and the need for revolutionary suicide as a way to escape the oppressive forces of the outside world. In 1978, concerns about the welfare of the People's Temple members in Jonestown reached a peak. Reports of abuse and people being held against their will prompted U.S. Congressman Leo Ryan to visit Jonestown to investigate. Ryan arrived in November 1978, accompanied by journalists and concerned relatives of Temple members. Initially, the visit seemed cordial, but it quickly became clear that something was very wrong. Several members secretly approached Ryan, begging to leave with him. As Ryan and his group were preparing to leave, Jones's paranoia reached its zenith. He ordered his guards to ambush the group at the airstrip, resulting in the deaths of Congressman Ryan, 3 journalists, and a temple defector. The attack marked the beginning of the end for Jonestown. In a final act of madness, Jim Jones ordered a mass suicide. On November 18, 1978, over 900 members of the People's Temple, including children, were forced or coerced into drinking a cyanide-laced drink, often referred to as Kool-Aid. Although it was actually a different brand, those who refused were shot or injected with poison. The scene was nightmarish. Bodies were found lying side by side, some in each other's arms, in a macabre testament to the power Jones held over his followers. Jim Jones himself was found dead from a gunshot wound, believed to be self-inflicted. The tragedy at Jonestown was one of the largest mass suicides in modern history, and remains a stark reminder of the dangers of blind obedience and the perils of charismatic leaders who exploit vulnerable people. The story of Jim Jones is a cautionary tale, showing how one man's twisted vision led to the destruction of so many lives. It's a story that continues to haunt us, serving as a warning about the potential for manipulation and the devastating consequences of unchecked power. If this dark chapter in history intrigued you, share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories that explore the depths of the human experience. In the year 2000, 7 men decided to escape from the Connolly Unit, a maximum security prison in Texas. These men were hardened criminals, already serving long sentences for violent crimes. They weren't just regular prisoners, they were known for being ruthless and dangerous. These men became known as the Texas 7. The members of the Texas 7 were George Rivas, the mastermind of the escape, along with Donald Newberry, Joseph Garcia, Randy Halpern, Patrick Murphy, Michael Rodriguez, and Larry Harper. Each of them had a long criminal record, including armed robbery, assault, and murder. These weren't first-time offenders. They were career criminals with nothing to lose. Together, they formed a dangerous and determined group, willing to do anything to regain their freedom. On December 13, 2000, the Texas 7 began their escape plan. They were smart and organized. They overpowered prison guards, stole their uniforms, and took control of the prison's armory. With weapons in hand, they knew they had to act quickly. They didn't just want to escape. They wanted to disappear and start a new life far away from the prison walls. Their first step was to steal a prison truck, which they used to drive out of the facility unnoticed. Once outside, they split up and changed vehicles to make it harder for the authorities to track them. They didn't just run. They plotted their next moves carefully, knowing that they were now on the run and that the law would stop at nothing to bring them back. The Texas 7 weren't just trying to stay free. They wanted to live large. To get money, they began robbing stores. They weren't subtle about it either. On Christmas Eve, just days after their escape, they robbed an Oshman's sporting goods store in Irving, Texas. This is where their story took a dark and tragic turn. While robbing the store, the Texas 7 took hostages, and they weren't afraid to use violence to get what they wanted. During the robbery, a police officer named Aubrey Hawkins responded to the scene. Officer Hawkins was brave and tried to stop them, but the gang ambushed him. They shot him 11 times, ran over him with their car, and left him to die. This cold-blooded murder shocked the entire country. The Texas 7 were no longer just escaped prisoners. They were now cold-blooded killers. The murder of Officer Hawkins turned the Texas 7 into the most wanted criminals in America. The FBI and local law enforcement launched one of the largest manhunts in U.S. history. The authorities were desperate to catch them before they could hurt anyone else. Despite the massive manhunt, the Texas 7 managed to stay on the run for over a month. They were clever, using disguises and stolen vehicles to evade capture. They moved across states, hiding in motels and camping out in remote areas. But they couldn't stay hidden forever. On January 21, 2001, their luck ran out. The authorities finally tracked them down to a trailer park in Colorado. The FBI and local police surrounded the area, preparing for a potentially deadly confrontation. The Texas 7 knew they were trapped, but they weren't ready to surrender. The standoff was intense. Some of the gang members refused to go down without a fight. They exchanged gunfire with the police, creating a terrifying and dangerous situation. But in the end, the law prevailed. One of the gang members, Larry Harper, decided he would rather die than go back to prison. He took his own life to avoid capture. The rest of the gang was eventually captured, ending their reign of terror. But the story didn't end there. The Texas 7 were brought back to Texas to face justice for their crimes. The trial was swift and decisive. They were all found guilty of capital murder for the killing of Officer Hawkins. The jury showed no mercy, and 6 of the surviving members were sentenced to death. Justice had been served, but the scars left by their violent spree would remain forever. Over the years, most of the Texas 7 have been executed by lethal injection. The story of the Texas 7 serves as a grim reminder of the dangers posed by those who have nothing to lose. They were ruthless and willing to do anything to stay free, even if it meant taking innocent lives. The disturbing end of the Texas 7 gang is a tale of desperation, violence, and ultimate justice. It's a story that still haunts those who remember it, especially the family and friends of Officer Aubrey Hawkins, who paid the ultimate price for his bravery. In the end, the Texas Seven couldn't escape their fate. Their violent rampage ended in death and despair, both for themselves and for those they hurt along the way. Their story is a chilling example of how far people can go when they lose their humanity, and how justice, though sometimes delayed, is always served. If you found this video compelling, let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel for more stories that reveal the dark and chilling sides of history.